"Can I have lunch with you?" asked the poor girl to the CEO who abandoned her mother 7 years ago, and when he saw her eyes, the CEO froze. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The Seattle rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor as Robert Harrison signed another multi-million-dollar contract. At 45, he commanded one of the most successful tech companies on the West Coast, his corner office overlooking the bustling city below like a modern-day throne room. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Harrison, there's a situation at reception." Rob barely looked up from his mahogany desk, fingers still dancing across his tablet. "Handle it, Patricia. I have the board meeting in 20 minutes. Sir, it's a child. She's asking specifically for you and she won't leave." Rob's fingers paused. In 15 years of running Harrison Tech Solutions, he'd dealt with protesters, disgruntled employees, even a few obsessed investors, but never a child. Security can escort her out. "She says she just wants to have lunch with you." Something in Patricia's tone made Rob finally lift his eyes from the screen. There was an uncertainty there he'd never heard before, and Patricia had been with the company since day one. She didn't get rattled easily. "I'll be right down." The elevator ride to the lobby felt longer than usual. Rob straightened his Italian silk tie and checked his reflection in the polished steel doors. Whatever this was about, he'd handle it quickly and efficiently, just like everything else in his carefully orchestrated life. The lobby of Harrison Tech buzzed with its usual energy. Employees hurrying between meetings, the gentle hum of conversations echoing off the marble floors, the soft ding of elevators. But near the reception desk, a small cluster had formed. Security guards stood at a respectful distance, clearly uncertain about how to handle their tiny visitor. Then Rob saw her. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The little girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wearing a faded pink dress that had seen better days and clutching a small backpack that looked like it had traveled many miles. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail and her sneakers had holes near the toes, but it was her face that made Rob's blood run cold. She had his eyes. Not just the color, that deep, almost navy blue that his mother used to say looked like storm clouds, but the shape, the way they tilted slightly at the corners. She had his stubborn chin, the same one that had gotten him through countless business battles. Even the way she stood, shoulders squared despite her obvious nervousness, mirrored his own posture. "Are you Mr. Robert Harrison?" she asked, her voice small but determined. Rob found himself unable to speak. The resemblance was impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away. This child looked like she could be— "Yes," he managed, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "I'm Robert Harrison." The little girl's face brightened with a smile that was purely her own, nothing like the calculated expressions Rob was used to seeing in his world of corporate dealings. "My name is Emma Mitchell. My mom used to tell me stories about you." Mitchell. The name hit him like a physical blow. Sarah Mitchell. 7 years ago, the brief, intense relationship that had ended when he'd chosen his company over everything else, including her, Sarah, with her infectious laugh and dreams of opening a small bakery. Sarah, who'd tried to tell him something important the night he'd walked away. "Where is your mother, Emma?" The question came out more sharply than he'd intended. Emma's bright expression faltered, and for a moment she looked exactly like the frightened little girl she really was. "She's gone. She got sick and went to heaven 3 weeks ago. The lady at the children's home said I could try to find family." The lobby seemed to spin around Rob. The conversations faded to white noise. The marble floor felt unsteady beneath his expensive Italian shoes. Sarah was dead. And this child, this little girl who looked so much like him it was impossible to deny, was alone. "I found your picture in Mom's old box," Emma continued, reaching into her backpack and pulling out a photograph that Rob recognized immediately. It was from 7 years ago, at the company Christmas party. He was smiling broadly, his arm around Sarah, both of them looking happy and carefree. On the back, in Sarah's familiar handwriting, were the words, "Emma's daddy, Robert Harrison, CEO, Harrison Tech Solutions, Seattle." Rob stared at the photograph, his hands trembling slightly as he held it. 7 years ago. The timing was right. The resemblance was undeniable. And Sarah had never contacted him, never told him. "I've been saving my allowance for the bus ticket for months," Emma said proudly. "Mrs. Peterson at the home doesn't know I'm here. I told her I was going to the library, but I came to find you instead." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I was hoping maybe you'd want to have lunch with me just once. Mom always said you were really busy, but I thought maybe." Rob looked down at this little girl, his daughter, the word formed in his mind with startling clarity, standing in his pristine corporate lobby with her worn clothes and hopeful eyes. She'd traveled across the state by herself, an 8-year-old child with nothing but a backpack and a 7-year-old photograph, looking for a father who'd never even known she existed. The board meeting, the contracts, the million-dollar deals. None of it seemed to matter anymore. But as Rob opened his mouth to respond, his phone buzzed urgently. Patricia's voice came through clearly. "Mr. Harrison, the board is asking for you immediately. There's been a development with the Morrison acquisition." Emma's face fell slightly as she heard the interruption. She started to step back, clearly expecting to be dismissed like so many other inconveniences in a busy executive's day. And in that moment, Rob realized that his next words would either change everything or destroy the one chance he might ever have to know the daughter he'd never known existed. What he chose to say would determine not just Emma's future, but the rest of his own life. Rob looked at the phone in his hand, then at Emma's expectant face. The Morrison acquisition, worth $300 million, suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the little girl standing before him. "Patricia," he said into the phone, never taking his eyes off Emma. "Reschedule the board meeting. Something more important has come up." Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. "Really? You'll have lunch with me?" "More than lunch," Rob said, kneeling down to her level for the first time. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. "How about we start with getting you something to eat, and then we figure out what comes next?" 30 minutes later, they sat in the executive dining room on the 20th floor. Emma had never seen anything like it. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, and a view that stretched across the entire city. She carefully cut her grilled cheese sandwich into tiny pieces, as if trying to make the moment last forever. "Mom used to make grilled cheese too," she said quietly, "but we used the cheap bread from the store." Rob felt his throat tighten. "Tell me about her, about your mom." Emma's face lit up. She was the best mom ever. She worked at 3 different places, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves in the morning, and sometimes helping at the diner on weekends. She was always tired, but she still read me stories every night. "What kind of stories?" "Stories about you," Emma said simply. "She told me you were the smartest person she ever met, and that you could solve any problem. She said you were going to change the world with your computers." Rob's chest tightened. Sarah had spoken well of him even after he'd abandoned her. Did she ever tell you why I wasn't around?" Emma nodded solemnly. "She said you had really important work to do, and that sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices. She said you didn't know about me because she wanted to protect me from being disappointed if you were too busy." The weight of Sarah's sacrifice hit Rob like a sledgehammer. She'd carried this burden alone, raising their daughter while working 3 jobs, never asking for help, never even telling him he had a child. "Emma," Rob said carefully, "where have you been staying since? Since your mom went to heaven?" "Sunshine Children's Home in Spokane. Mrs. Peterson is nice, but there are lots of kids and not enough beds. I share a room with 3 other girls." Emma's voice got smaller. "Some of them have been there for years. They say nobody wants older kids." Rob's businessman mind was already calculating custody procedures, legal requirements, background checks. But his heart was focused on one simple fact. His daughter had been sleeping in an overcrowded children's home while he lived alone in a mansion overlooking Puget Sound. "Emma, would you like to come stay with me? We'd have to talk to some people and fill out some papers, but—" "You mean it?" Emma's sandwich fell forgotten onto her plate. "I could live with you, if that's what you want, but Emma, I need to be honest with you. I don't know how to be a dad. I've never taken care of anyone but myself." Emma studied his face with the intense concentration only children possess. "Mom said the best way to learn something is to just start doing it and ask questions when you get stuck." For the first time in years, Rob found himself genuinely smiling. Your mom was a smart woman. They spent the rest of the afternoon in his office, Emma curled up in the leather chair by the window, while Rob made phone calls to lawyers, social workers, and anyone else who could help him navigate the system. Emma drew pictures with the expensive pens from his desk, creating elaborate drawings of the two of them, living in a house with a big yard and a dog. But as the day wore on, Rob began to realize that bringing Emma home would be more complicated than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. The next morning, Rob found himself in the most surreal situation of his life, shopping for children's clothes at Target with a daughter he'd known for less than 24 hours. Emma had spent the night in his guest room, though neither of them had slept much. "I don't need a lot," Emma insisted as Rob filled the cart with everything from pajamas to school supplies. "Mom always said we should only buy what we need." "What we need and what we want can be different things," Rob replied, adding a stuffed elephant to the cart when he caught Emma looking at it longingly. As they waited in line, Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Why didn't you ever call Mom, even just to say hi?" The question hit him harder than any boardroom confrontation. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that he'd been a coward, that he'd chosen the safety of his work over the uncertainty of love? "I made a mistake," he said finally. "The biggest mistake of my life. I thought my work was more important than anything else." "But you're here now," Emma said with the simple logic of childhood. "Mom always said it's never too late to fix a mistake if you really want to." That afternoon, they drove to Spokane to collect Emma's belongings from Sunshine Children's Home. Rob was expecting a few suitcases, maybe some toys. Instead, everything Emma owned fit into a single garbage bag, some worn clothes, a few books, and a small wooden box. "This was Mom's," Emma said, clutching the box protectively. "It has all the important things." Mrs. Peterson, the home director, was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who eyed Rob with barely concealed suspicion. "Mr. Harrison, I have to say, this is highly irregular. Emma just disappeared yesterday. We were about to call the police." "I understand your concern," Rob said, producing the folder of legal documents his attorney had prepared overnight. "But I am her biological father, and I'm prepared to take full custody." "With all due respect, sir, being a biological parent and being a capable parent are two very different things. Emma has been through tremendous trauma. She needs stability, not someone who's going to disrupt her life and then disappear when things get difficult." Rob felt Emma's small hand slip into his. "He won't disappear," she said quietly. "He promised." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened as she looked at Emma. "Sweetheart, adults sometimes make promises they can't keep." "Not this adult," Rob said firmly. "I've already filed for emergency custody, enrolled her in school and arranged for a full-time nanny until I can adjust my work schedule. I may not know how to be a father yet, but I'm going to learn." As they drove back to Seattle, Emma carefully opened her mother's wooden box in the passenger seat. Rob glanced over and saw photographs, letters, and small mementos that told the story of a life he'd never been part of. "Look," Emma said, holding up a hospital bracelet. "This is from when I was born. Mom kept it." Rob's heart clenched as he read the date, exactly 7 years and 4 months ago. He would have been preparing for the biggest presentation of his career that week, completely unaware that he'd become a father. "And this," Emma continued, pulling out a small stack of letters. "These are letters Mom wrote to you, but never sent." Rob nearly swerved off the highway. "Letters? She wrote you one every year on my birthday. Want to hear what she said?" Before Rob could answer, Emma had opened the first letter and begun reading in her clear, young voice. "Dear Robert, Emma turned 1 today. She took her first steps last week, and I swear she has your determination. She fell down 6 times but kept getting back up." As Emma continued reading about birthdays and first days of school, lost teeth and scraped knees, Rob realized he was crying. 7 years of his daughter's life, carefully documented by a woman who'd loved him enough to protect him from a responsibility she thought he wasn't ready for. But the hardest part was yet to come, because Emma's last letter, written just 2 months before Sarah's death, contained news that would change everything Rob thought he knew about their past. Rob's first week as a father was like learning to run a Fortune 500 company while blindfolded and speaking a foreign language. Emma was patient with his mistakes, and there were many. The first morning he made her eggs Benedict for breakfast because it was the only thing he knew how to cook well. Emma politely ate 2 bites before admitting she'd never heard of hollandaise sauce and usually just had cereal. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rob asked, already reaching for his phone to order groceries. "I didn't want to hurt your feelings," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Mom said when someone does something nice for you, you should always be grateful, even if it's not exactly what you wanted." Rob found himself learning more about kindness from his 8-year-old daughter than he had in 45 years of life. The second day, he discovered that having a child meant his meticulously planned schedule meant nothing. Emma's new school called during a crucial conference call. She'd had a panic attack during lunch and was asking for her daddy. Rob left the meeting mid-sentence and drove across town to find Emma curled up in the nurse's office, tears streaming down her face. "I got scared," she whispered as he held her. "There were so many kids and they all knew each other, and I started thinking about Mom and how she's never coming back, and I just wanted to go home." "Then let's go home," Rob said simply, signing her out for the rest of the day. They spent the afternoon in his office, Emma coloring while Rob worked. His employees did double takes as they passed by, not used to seeing their intimidating CEO helping a little girl with her art project. "Mr. Harrison," Patricia said during a brief moment when Emma was in the bathroom, "the Morrison deal is falling apart. They say you're not taking it seriously anymore." Rob looked at the door Emma had just walked through, then at the drawing she'd left on his desk. A picture of the 2 of them holding hands under a rainbow. "Schedule a call with Morrison for tonight, after Emma's bedtime," he said. "And Patricia, start looking for qualified candidates for interim CEO. I think it's time I learned about work-life balance." By the third day, they'd established a routine. Emma woke up early to help him make simple breakfasts. She taught him how to make proper pancakes from a box mix. She'd pack her own lunch while he checked emails, and they'd drive to school together, singing along to whatever pop songs she liked. But it was during their evening routine that Rob learned the most about his daughter. After dinner and homework, they'd sit in the living room, and Emma would tell him stories about her life with Sarah. Some were happy, like the time they'd saved up for 3 months to go to the zoo, and ended up spending the whole day watching the penguins because Emma thought they looked like they were wearing tiny tuxedos. Others broke his heart, like how Emma used to pretend to be asleep when Sarah came home from her night shift, exhausted and sometimes crying from the stress of making ends meet. "I wanted to help her," Emma said one evening, "but I was too little to get a job." "You helped her in ways you don't even realize," Rob replied, stroking her hair as she curled up next to him on the couch. "You were the reason she kept going." "Do you think she's proud of me for finding you?" Rob's throat tightened. "I think she's proud of you for everything, sweetheart, just like I am." It was during one of these evening conversations that Emma mentioned something that made Rob's blood run cold. "There's something else in Mom's box," she said casually. "A paper from the doctor. I can't read all the words, but it talks about her being sick for a long time." Rob's heart stopped. "Emma, can you show me that paper?" As Emma retrieved the medical document from her mother's box, Rob realized that Sarah's death might not have been as sudden as he'd assumed. And if she'd been sick for a long time, there were questions that desperately needed answers. Questions about why she'd finally decided to tell Emma about him, and what else she might have been planning before it was too late. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Rob sat at his kitchen table with Sarah's wooden box spread open before him. The medical document Emma had shown him painted a heartbreaking picture. Sarah had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 8 months ago. The prognosis had been grim from the start. With trembling hands, Rob picked up the stack of letters Emma had mentioned in the car. 7 letters, one for each of Emma's birthdays. But it was the 8th letter, dated just 6 weeks before Sarah's death, that made his world shift on its axis. "My dearest Robert," the letter began in Sarah's familiar handwriting, though it was shakier now, weakened by illness. "I'm writing this letter because I finally have the courage to tell you the truth about why I never contacted you about Emma. It wasn't because I wanted to protect you from the responsibility, as I told Emma. It was because I was protecting myself from what I thought would be inevitable rejection. The night you ended things between us, I'd been waiting for the right moment to tell you I was pregnant. When you said your company had to come first, that you couldn't handle any distractions, I realized I was exactly that to you, a distraction. So I let you walk away rather than risk hearing you say that our child would be one too. I've regretted that decision every day for 7 years. Rob's hands shook as he continued reading. But now I'm dying, Robert, and Emma will be alone. I've been watching you from afar, reading about your success, seeing photos of you at charity events and business conferences. You've become the man I always knew you could be. But more than that, you've started a foundation for underprivileged children. That tells me your heart has grown alongside your success. I'm not asking you to forgive me for keeping Emma from you. I'm asking you to forgive yourself for the choices you made 7 years ago, because Emma is going to need a father who isn't consumed by guilt. She's the most remarkable child, Robert. She has your intelligence and your determination, but she also has something I hope she can teach you, the ability to find joy in simple moments. She can make friends with anyone. She believes in magic, and she thinks every sunset is painted specifically for her to enjoy. If something happens to me before I find the courage to contact you directly, I've prepared Emma with stories about you. I've told her you're a good man who works very hard to help people, and that sometimes good people make choices they later regret. I've told her that if she ever needs you, she should be brave enough to find you herself. Please don't let my mistakes deprive you both of the chance to know each other. Emma needs a father, but more than that, I think you need Emma. Oh, my love, Sarah, P.S. I've enclosed something I should have given you 7 years ago. Rob's heart pounded as he reached into the envelope and pulled out a small ultrasound photo. Across the top, in Sarah's handwriting, were the words, "Baby Harrison, 8 weeks, due March 15th. In the corner, she'd written, "She has your stubborn streak already, refuse to turn around for a better picture." March 15th, Emma's birthday. Rob calculated backward. Sarah would have been about 10 weeks pregnant the night he'd walked away. She'd been sitting across from him at dinner, probably nervous about sharing the news, and he'd been talking about quarterly projections and market expansions. Rob buried his face in his hands as the full weight of his choices crashed over him. Sarah had spent 7 years believing he would have seen their child as a burden, while he'd spent 7 years building a company that meant nothing compared to the family he'd never known he'd lost. A soft sound made him look up. Emma stood in the doorway in her new pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, are you sad?" The word daddy still made his heart skip. "Come here, sweetheart." Emma padded over and climbed into his lap, studying the papers spread across the table. "Are those more of Mom's letters?" "Yes." "Emma, did your mom ever tell you she wrote to me while she was sick?" Emma nodded. "She said she was trying to be brave enough to call you, but then she got too tired to talk much." Rob held her closer, understanding now why Emma had seemed so mature, so independent. She'd been taking care of her dying mother, probably handling more responsibility than any 8-year-old should bear. "I want you to know something," Rob said carefully. "Your mom was one of the bravest people I've ever known, and she did find the courage to bring us together. Through you." Emma looked up at him with those eyes that mirrored his own. "Does that mean you're not mad at her for not telling you about me sooner?" "I could never be mad at her for that," Rob said. "She was protecting you just like she always did." But as Emma drifted back to sleep in his arms, Rob realized there was one more secret Sarah's letters had revealed, one that would soon bring complications he never could have anticipated. Rob thought the hardest part of becoming an instant father would be learning to balance work and parenting. He was wrong. The hardest part turned out to be dealing with people who questioned his right to be Emma's father at all. It started with a phone call on Friday morning. Rob was helping Emma with her math homework when his personal phone rang. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and completely unwelcome. "Mr. Harrison?" "This is Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services. We need to schedule a meeting regarding Emma Mitchell." Rob's blood ran cold. "I'm sorry. What about Emma?" "We've received a complaint questioning the circumstances of your custody arrangement. Specifically, concerns have been raised about an 8-year-old child traveling alone across state lines to find a man who has no documented relationship with her." "I'm her father," Rob said, instinctively moving closer to Emma, who had looked up from her homework with worry in her eyes. "That's what we need to discuss, Mr. Harrison. Can you come in Monday morning? And please bring all documentation proving paternity." After Rob hung up, Emma's small voice broke the silence. "Are they going to take me away?" Rob knelt down and took her hands in his. "I won't let that happen. You're my daughter, and you belong with me." But even as he said the words, Rob realized how thin his legal standing really was. He had no birth certificate listing him as Emma's father, no custody agreement, no official documentation of any kind. He had only Emma's word, a photograph, and a stunning family resemblance that any court would still require DNA testing to confirm. Monday morning's meeting was even worse than Rob had anticipated. Janet Morrison was a stern woman in her 40s who looked at Rob like he was a potential predator rather than a father trying to claim his child. "Mr. Harrison, Emma Mitchell was in the legal custody of the state when you removed her from Sunshine Children's Home. Without proper documentation, that constitutes kidnapping." "That's ridiculous," Rob's attorney, Michael Chen, interjected. "My client is the biological father." "Alleged biological father," Morrison corrected. "We have no proof of that claim. What we do have is an 8-year-old child who was manipulated into believing a stranger was her father." "Manipulated?" Rob's voice rose. "She has my eyes, my chin, she even stands the way I stand. Anyone with eyes can see." "Physical resemblance isn't legal proof, Mr. Harrison, and frankly, your sudden interest in this child raises red flags. You had no contact with her or her mother for 8 years, but now you expect us to believe you're ready to be a parent?" The meeting went downhill from there. Morrison wanted Emma placed back in state custody pending DNA tests and a full investigation into Rob's background. She questioned his financial motives, suggesting he might be trying to exploit Emma's story for publicity. She even questioned his mental stability, pointing out that most rational adults would go through proper legal channels rather than take a strange child home after one conversation. "Ms. Morrison," Michael said firmly, "my client has already submitted to DNA testing, background checks, and psychological evaluation. He's also establishing a trust fund for Emma's education and future needs. These are not the actions of someone with ulterior motives. They're the actions of someone with unlimited resources trying to buy his way out of legal consequences," Morrison shot back. When they finally left the meeting, Rob felt like he'd been through a war. Worse, he knew Emma was at school, completely unaware that her new life was already under attack. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Emma could sense something was wrong. "Daddy, are you in trouble because of me?" Rob set down his fork and looked at his daughter, no matter what anyone said. "Emma, some people think I shouldn't be allowed to take care of you because I don't have the right papers yet. They want you to go back to the children's home until we can prove I'm really your father." Emma's face went pale. "But you are my father. Mom told me. And I can see it when I look at you." "I know, sweetheart, and we're going to prove it to everyone else too. But it might take some time and it might be scary. And..." Emma was quiet for a long moment, pushing food around on her plate. Then she looked up with the determination Rob was beginning to recognize as purely her own. "Daddy, in Mom's box, there's one more thing I didn't show you. I was saving it because it made me sad. But I think maybe it could help. I think maybe it..." Rob's heart pounded as Emma ran to get the wooden box. What she pulled out made his breath catch in his throat. It was a legal document he'd never expected to see. And what was written on that document would either save them both, or destroy any chance they had of staying together. Emma returned with a folded piece of legal paper that looked different from the other documents in Sarah's box. This one was official, with raised seals and formal signatures. Rob's hands trembled as he unfolded it. It was a will, dated 3 months before Sarah's death. But it wasn't just any will. It was a formal declaration of paternity and custody wishes that made Rob's eyes fill with tears. "I, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare that Robert James Harrison is the biological father of my daughter, Emma Rose Mitchell, born March 15, 2018. I further declare that it is my express wish that should anything happen to me, custody of Emma should be granted to her father, Robert Harrison, provided he is willing and able to care for her." The document was notarized and signed by 2 witnesses. More importantly, attached to it was a DNA sample Sarah had somehow obtained, a strand of Rob's hair in a small sealed envelope with the date and his name written in Sarah's handwriting. "How did she get this?" Rob whispered. Emma climbed into his lap. "Remember when Mom told me about the company Christmas party? She said she kept everything from that night because it was special, even the hair from your jacket when you hugged goodbye." Rob stared at his daughter in amazement. Sarah had been thinking 7 years ahead, protecting Emma's future even when she'd been too proud to ask for help in the present. The next morning, Michael Chen was practically bouncing with excitement when Rob showed him the document. "This changes everything. We have legal proof of paternity and Sarah's explicit wishes for custody. Morrison won't be able to argue against this." But their celebration was short-lived. That afternoon, Janet Morrison called with news that made Rob's stomach drop. "Mr. Harrison, we've located Emma's maternal grandparents, Margaret and Donald Mitchell from Portland. They're filing for custody, claiming you're an unfit parent and that Emma belongs with blood family who actually knew her mother." Rob felt the world tilt beneath him. Emma has grandparents? Apparently, Sarah had been estranged from them for years. They claimed they didn't know about Emma's existence until they saw the news story about you claiming custody. They're arriving in Seattle tomorrow with their own attorney. That evening, Rob had to explain to Emma that she had more family she'd never known about. Emma listened carefully, then asked the question that broke his heart. "Do they want me more than you do?" "Emma, look at me," Rob said, taking her small hands in his. "No one could want you more than I do. You're my daughter, and I will fight for you with everything I have." But even as he said the words, Rob wondered if love would be enough against grandparents who could claim a lifetime of family connection he couldn't match. The next morning brought more bad news. Margaret and Donald Mitchell looked like the perfect grandparents. She was a retired teacher, he was a former pastor. They arrived with photo albums full of pictures of Sarah as a child, school awards, family Christmas mornings that painted a picture of the loving family Emma had never known existed. "We loved Sarah dearly," Margaret Mitchell said during their first meeting, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "We had a falling out when she was young and stubborn, but we never stopped hoping she'd come home. If we'd known about Emma, we would have helped immediately." Rob studied the older couple, looking for some sign of deception. But they seemed genuinely heartbroken about losing their daughter and desperate to know their granddaughter. "Why didn't Sarah ever mention you to Emma?" Rob asked. Donald Mitchell's face hardened slightly. "Because she was angry with us for not approving of her lifestyle choices. Sarah always was headstrong, but we thought she'd eventually see reason and come back to the family." "What lifestyle choices?" Rob pressed. Margaret exchanged a look with her husband. "She was involved with men who weren't suitable, Mr. Harrison, present company included, if you'll forgive my bluntness. You abandoned our daughter when she was pregnant." The accusation hit Rob like a physical blow, especially because it was partially true. But something about the way Margaret said it, the slight sneer in her voice when she mentioned Sarah's choices, made Rob's protective instincts flare. That afternoon, Emma met her grandparents for the first time. Rob watched anxiously as they showered her with gifts and attention, showing her pictures of the mother she'd never seen as a child. "Your mama was about your age in this picture," Margaret cooed, pointing to a photo of a young Sarah in a frilly pink dress. "She was such a perfect little lady." Emma studied the photo with confusion. "Mom never wore dresses like that. She said they were hard to play in." "Well, little girls should learn to be ladylike," Margaret replied with a tight smile. "Don't worry, dear. We'll teach you proper manners." Rob felt Emma stiffen beside him, and he realized that these people, well-meaning as they might be, saw Emma as a project to be fixed, rather than a child to be loved as she was. But the real shock came when their attorney presented Rob with an offer that made his blood run cold. They would drop their custody suit if Rob agreed to sign away his parental rights and allow them to adopt Emma completely. "Think about it logically, Mr. Harrison," their lawyer said smoothly. "You're a busy executive with no experience raising children. Emma needs stability, not a father figure who's learning on the job. The Mitchells can provide her with a traditional family environment, proper education, and the kind of upbringing Sarah would have wanted." Rob looked across the conference table at Emma, who was quietly coloring while the adults discussed her future like she was a piece of property to be transferred. "No," he said simply. "Excuse me. I said no. Emma is my daughter, and she belongs with me." Margaret Mitchell's mask of sweetness finally slipped. "Mr. Harrison, you didn't even know this child existed until 2 weeks ago. We are her blood family. We have rights." "So do I," Rob replied, standing up. "And so does Emma. The right to choose the family that loves her for who she is, not who you think she should become." As they left the meeting, Emma slipped her hand into Rob's. "Daddy, do I have to go live with them?" "Not if I can help it, sweetheart, but Emma, I need you to know this might get harder before it gets better." Emma squeezed his hand tighter. "I'm not scared as long as we're together." But Rob was scared, because Margaret Mitchell's parting words had contained a threat that chilled him to the bone. "We know things about Sarah's final months that you don't, Mr. Harrison, things that might change how the court views this situation. What secrets were the Mitchells hiding about Sarah's death? And how far would they go to take Emma away from the father she'd fought so hard to find?" While lawyers battled over Emma's future, Rob was learning that being a father meant more than providing for a child. It meant truly seeing her. And the more he watched Emma, the more he understood why Sarah had kept her away from her parents. Emma was nothing like the proper little lady Margaret Mitchell wanted her to become. She was curious, adventurous, and completely uninterested in sitting still. She asked endless questions about how computers worked, why the sky was blue, and whether there really were bears in the mountains around Seattle. "Daddy, why do grown-ups spend so much time in meetings talking about boring stuff?" Emma asked one afternoon as they walked through Pike Place Market. "What makes you think it's boring?" Rob replied, genuinely curious about her perspective. "Because nobody smiles during meetings. Mom always said if something doesn't make you smile at least a little bit, you're probably not doing it right." Rob stopped walking, struck by the simple wisdom of his 8-year-old daughter. How many meetings had he sat through? How many deals had he negotiated without ever once smiling because he enjoyed what he was doing? They spent the afternoon exploring the market, Emma marveling at the fish vendors who threw salmon through the air and the artists who painted, while crowds watched. She convinced Rob to try foods he'd never heard of and to listen to a street musician who played violin with more passion than technical skill. "He's not perfect," Emma observed, "but he looks happy." "Is that what matters most to you, being happy?" Emma considered this seriously, the way she approached all important questions. Mom used to say that being happy was nice, but being kind was more important. She said happy feelings come and go, but kindness stays forever. That evening, Rob sat in his home office, reviewing depositions and legal briefs while Emma did homework at the small desk he'd installed for her. Every few minutes, she'd ask for help with a math problem or want to share something interesting she'd learned about dolphins. "Daddy, did you know dolphins talk to each other? They each have their own special whistle like a name." "I didn't know that," Rob replied, looking up from a contract dispute that suddenly seemed incredibly unimportant. "I wish people had special whistles too. Then I could call you even when you're in meetings." Rob closed his laptop and moved to sit beside her. "Emma, do you feel like I'm not paying enough attention to you?" "Oh no," Emma said quickly. "You pay lots more attention than most grown-ups, but sometimes you get that look in your eyes like you're thinking about work stuff, and I can tell you're not really here with me." Rob felt a stab of guilt. Even now, when Emma's future hung in the balance, part of his mind was still calculating quarterly projections and market analyses. "You're right," he admitted. "I'm still learning how to turn off work brain and turn on daddy brain." Emma giggled. "Maybe you need 2 different computers in your head, one for work stuff and one for family stuff." "That's actually not a bad idea. What would be on the family computer?" Emma's face lit up as she began listing priorities. "Bedtime stories, and remembering which vegetables I don't like, and knowing that I get scared during thunderstorms, and remembering that hugs are always the right answer when someone is sad." Rob realized his daughter was giving him a manual for being her father, and it was more valuable than any business strategy he'd ever developed. Their moment was interrupted by Rob's phone ringing. The caller ID showed Michael Chen, and Rob's stomach immediately knotted. "Rob, we have a problem," Michael said without preamble. "The Mitchells have filed additional documentation with the court. They're claiming Sarah was mentally unstable during her final months and that her custody wishes should be disregarded." "That's ridiculous. Sarah was dealing with terminal cancer, but she was completely lucid." They have medical records suggesting she was on heavy pain medication and suffered from depression. They're arguing that she wasn't competent to make custody decisions. Rob looked at Emma, who was pretending to focus on her homework, but clearly listening to every word. Michael, I can't discuss this right now. Rob, there's more. They're also claiming that Emma has been showing signs of trauma since coming to live with you. They want her examined by a court-appointed psychologist. After Rob hung up, Emma set down her pencil and looked at him with those serious eyes that reminded him so much of Sarah. They want to take me away, don't they? Rob knelt down beside her chair. They want to try. But Emma, I need you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. These last 2 weeks with you have been worth more than the last 7 years without you. Emma threw her arms around his neck. I love you too, Daddy, and I don't want to live with anyone else. Then we'll fight, Rob said simply, together. But as he held his daughter, Rob couldn't shake the feeling that the Mitchells knew something he didn't, something that could destroy not just his custody case, but his entire understanding of who Sarah really was. The next morning would bring revelations that would test everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd once loved and the daughter they'd created together. The court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Rebecca Santos, was a kind woman in her 50s who specialized in trauma and family dynamics. Rob watched through a one-way mirror as she interviewed Emma, his heart breaking at how small his daughter looked in the oversized office chair. Emma, can you tell me how you've been feeling since you came to live with your father? Happy, Emma replied without hesitation. Sometimes sad about Mom, but happy about having a daddy. Do you ever feel scared or worried? Emma considered this carefully. I worry that people might make me leave him, but I'm not scared of Daddy. He makes me feel safe. Dr. Santos made notes and continued gently probing. Have there been any times when your father made you uncomfortable or upset? Only when he tried to make eggs Benedict for breakfast, Emma said seriously. It was kind of gross. Despite the gravity of the situation, Rob found himself smiling. Even under professional questioning, Emma remained purely herself. But the interview took a darker turn when Dr. Santos began asking about Sarah. Emma, did your mother ever act strangely before she got sick? Did she seem confused or say things that didn't make sense? Emma's face clouded over. Mom was never confused. She was the smartest person I knew. Even when she was really sick, she still helped me with homework and told me stories. Did she ever talk about things that weren't real? Maybe see people who weren't there? No. Emma's voice rose with indignation. Mom was perfect. She never said crazy things. Rob felt his hands clench into fists. The Mitchells were trying to paint Sarah as an unstable woman whose final wishes couldn't be trusted. It was character assassination of someone who couldn't defend herself. After the interview, Dr. Santos met with Rob privately. Mr. Harrison, Emma is a remarkably well-adjusted child. She shows no signs of trauma from living with you. In fact, she demonstrates a strong, healthy attachment. Then why do I feel like there's a but coming? Dr. Santos sighed. Because the Mitchells have provided documentation that raises questions about Sarah's mental state during her final months. Medical records showing she was prescribed heavy psychiatric medications in addition to pain management. There are also reports from neighbors who claim she was sometimes found wandering the neighborhood at night, confused and disoriented. Rob's world tilted. That doesn't sound like the Sarah I knew. Mental illness can manifest unexpectedly, especially under the stress of terminal illness. The question becomes whether her custody wishes were made during a period of clarity or confusion. That evening, Rob sat Emma down for a conversation he'd been dreading. Emma, I need to ask you some difficult questions about your mum's last few months. Do you remember her acting differently when she was very sick? Emma's face grew sad but thoughtful. She slept a lot more, and sometimes she forgot things like what day it was or whether she'd already given me dinner. But Daddy, she was never confused about important things. She always knew who I was, and she always knew she loved me. Did she ever go outside at night? Emma nodded. Sometimes when the pain was really bad, she'd walk around the neighborhood because moving helped. She said the night air made her feel better. I always watched from the window to make sure she came back. Rob felt his heart break, imagining 8-year-old Emma keeping vigil at the window, watching over her dying mother. The image the Mitchells were painting of a confused woman wandering aimlessly was actually a mother trying to manage her pain while caring for her child. But their legal troubles were far from over. The next morning brought the news Rob had been dreading most. The court has ordered Emma to be placed in temporary foster care pending the final custody hearing, Michael informed him. The judge wants to remove her from the contested environment while they review all the evidence. No, Rob said flatly. They can't take her away from me. Rob, I'm sorry. It's temporary and it'll actually work in our favor if we can show that Emma thrives in your care compared to foster placement. But Rob wasn't thinking like a lawyer anymore. He was thinking like a father who was about to lose his daughter to a system that saw her as a case number rather than a human being. That afternoon, a social worker arrived to collect Emma. Rob watched his daughter pack her few belongings, everything she owned in the world still fit into one small suitcase, and fought back tears. "Daddy, am I in trouble?" Emma asked as she hugged her stuffed elephant. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. Some grown-ups just need to figure out what's best for you. But I already know what's best for me," Emma said with the simple logic that had come to characterize all her observations. "Being with you is best for me." As the social worker led Emma away, she turned back and called out, "Don't forget about me, Daddy." Rob's heart shattered. "I could never forget about you, Emma. I'll see you soon." But as the car disappeared down his driveway, Rob realized that soon might not be soon enough. The custody hearing was still 2 weeks away, and every day Emma spent in foster care was another day she might begin to doubt that he was really fighting for her. That night, alone in his house for the first time since Emma had entered his life, Rob sat in her empty bedroom and made a decision that would either save his family or destroy his life completely. He was going to find out what the Mitchells were really hiding about Sarah's final months. And if they thought they could use lies about a dead woman to steal his daughter, they were about to learn just how far a father would go to protect his child. Rob's investigation into Sarah's final months led him to the most unlikely of places, a small diner called Mel's Place where Sarah had worked her weekend shifts. The owner, Mel Rodriguez, was a gruff man in his 60s who looked at Rob with immediate suspicion. "You're the fancy businessman who claims to be Emma's daddy," Mel said, not making it a question. "I am Emma's father," Rob replied firmly, "and I'm trying to understand what really happened to Sarah in her final months." Mel studied him for a long moment, then poured 2 cups of coffee without being asked. "Sarah was the best waitress I ever had, worked her ass off, never complained, and the customers loved her when she got sick." He shook his head. "That girl was tougher than a $2 steak. Did she seem confused or unstable to you?" "Hell no. Sarah was sharp as a tack right up until the end. Sure, the pain medication made her sleepy sometimes, but confused? Never." Mel's eyes narrowed. "Who told you she was confused?" "Her parents. They're trying to prove she wasn't competent when she wrote her will." Mel's face darkened. "Those people came around here about a month ago, asking questions and offering money for people to say Sarah was acting crazy. Most folks told them to go to hell." Rob's blood ran cold. "They were trying to buy testimony?" "Worse than that. When nobody would take their money, they started digging up dirt on Sarah's neighbors. Found out Mrs. Patterson next door had an outstanding warrant for unpaid parking tickets and threatened to call it in unless she signed a statement saying Sarah wandered around confused at night." "Can you prove this?" Mel reached under the counter and pulled out a small recording device. "I've been taping every conversation I have with anyone official since my divorce. Habit, I guess. I got the whole conversation with the Mitchells right here." As Rob listened to the recording, his anger transformed into something harder and more focused. Margaret and Donald Mitchell weren't grieving grandparents seeking what was best for Emma. They were calculating manipulators willing to destroy Sarah's memory to get what they wanted. But the recording revealed something even more shocking. "We should have taken action years ago," Margaret's voice crackled through the speaker. "If we'd reported Sarah for neglect when Emma was younger, we could have gotten custody then and avoided this mess with the biological father." "The girl needs proper guidance," Donald's voice added. "Sarah was raising her to be wild and disrespectful, just like she was. Emma needs to learn discipline and proper values." Rob's hands clenched into fists. The Mitchells weren't interested in loving Emma. They wanted to reshape her into their image of what a child should be. Armed with this new evidence, Rob rushed to Michael Chen's office. But what his lawyer told him made his heart sink. "Rob, this recording is devastating for their character, but it might not be admissible in court. It was obtained without their consent, and Mel could face legal consequences for recording them. So they can lie about Sarah and buy false testimony, but we can't prove they're lying." "There might be another way," Michael said slowly. "If we could find someone who was actually there during Sarah's final weeks, someone who could testify to her mental state." Rob's mind raced. Then suddenly he remembered something Emma had mentioned casually weeks ago. "The hospice nurse," he said. "Emma talked about a nice lady who came to help with her mum." If Sarah was receiving hospice care, there would be detailed records of her mental state. It took 2 days to track down Linda Walsh, the hospice nurse who had cared for Sarah during her final month. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen too much suffering to tolerate lies. "Sarah Mitchell was one of the most courageous patients I've ever worked with," Linda said without hesitation. "She was in tremendous physical pain, but mentally, she was completely clear. She spent her last weeks preparing Emma for life without her." The Mitchells claim she was confused and disoriented. Linda's expression hardened. "That's completely false. Sarah was on pain medication, yes, but she was very careful about managing it. She never wanted to be impaired when Emma needed her. In fact, she often refused additional pain relief because she wanted to stay alert for her daughter." "Would you be willing to testify to that in court?" "Absolutely. But there's something else you should know." Linda hesitated, then continued. "About 2 weeks before Sarah died, an older couple came to visit her. They claimed to be her parents, said they'd come to reconcile. Sarah was devastated after they left." Rob's stomach clenched. "What did they say to her?" "Sarah wouldn't tell me details, but she was crying and kept saying she'd made the right choice years ago to stay away from them. She said they wanted to take Emma after she died, and she was terrified they'd try to change everything about her daughter that made her special." "Did Sarah say anything about Emma's father?" Linda smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "She talked about you constantly. She regretted not telling you about Emma, but she was also afraid you wouldn't want the responsibility. She said you were a good man who worked too hard, and she hoped Emma could teach you how to enjoy life." As Rob drove back to Seattle, one more piece of the puzzle fell into place. The Mitchells hadn't just recently learned about Emma. They'd known about her for weeks before Sarah's death. They'd come to claim their granddaughter, been rejected by Sarah, and were now systematically destroying Sarah's reputation to get what they wanted. But the biggest revelation was still coming, because that evening Linda Walsh called Rob with information that would change everything he thought he knew about Emma's last days with her mother. "Mr. Harrison," Linda said, her voice trembling slightly, "I found something in my notes that I think you need to see. It's about what Sarah made me promise to do if anything happened to you during the custody battle." "What kind of promise?" "She made me swear that if the courts tried to separate you and Emma, I would give you a package she left in my safekeeping. She said it contained proof that would protect Emma from anyone who tried to take her away from the father she belonged with." Rob's heart pounded. "What's in the package?" "I don't know. Sarah sealed it and made me promise only to open it if Emma's safety was at stake. Mr. Harrison, I think that time has come. The package Sarah had left behind would either save Emma's future with her father or reveal secrets that could destroy them both." But as Rob drove through the Seattle night to meet Linda Walsh, he knew that whatever Sarah had hidden away, it was her final gift to the daughter she'd loved enough to let go find her father. The truth about Sarah's last days was about to be revealed, and with it, the real reason the Mitchells were so desperate to keep Emma away from the man Sarah had chosen to be her father. The package Linda Walsh handed Rob was smaller than he'd expected, just a manila envelope sealed with tape and marked, "For Emma's father," in Sarah's careful handwriting. Inside were 3 items that would change everything: a video recording on a USB drive, a stack of photographs, and a letter addressed to Rob. "Sarah recorded this 2 days before she died," Linda explained softly. "She was very specific about when it should be given to you." Rob's hands trembled as he inserted the USB drive into his laptop. Sarah's face appeared on the screen, thinner than he remembered but with eyes that burned with fierce determination. She was sitting in what looked like a hospital bed, but her voice was strong and clear. "Robert, if you're watching this, it means Emma found you and you're fighting for her. It also means my parents have probably shown up, trying to convince everyone that I was incompetent or unstable. I need you to know the truth about why I kept Emma away from them, and why I always knew she belonged with you." Rob wiped his eyes as Sarah continued, her image flickering slightly on the old recording. "My parents disowned me when I was 19 because I refused to marry the man they'd chosen for me. They told me I was selfish and rebellious, that I'd never amount to anything without their guidance. When I got pregnant with Emma, I knew they'd see her as a second chance to raise a child properly, meaning they'd try to break her spirit the way they tried to break mine." The photographs told the rest of the story. Rob spread them across the table, seeing for the first time glimpses of Sarah's childhood. In the early pictures, she was a bright, laughing child. But as she got older, the light in her eyes gradually dimmed. By her teenage years, she looked like a different person, subdued, careful, walking on eggshells. "Emma is everything I was before they convinced me I was wrong to be myself," Sarah's voice continued from the video. "She's curious and brave and kind, and she believes in magic. Robert, promise me you won't let them turn her into what they tried to turn me into. Promise me you'll let her stay wild and wonderful." The letter contained even more devastating information. Sarah had documented years of emotional abuse, controlling behavior, and threats from her parents. She'd included copies of letters they'd sent her after she left home, letters filled with criticism and conditional love that painted a picture of people who saw children as possessions to be molded rather than individuals to be cherished. But the most important revelation came at the end of Sarah's video message. "There's one more thing you need to know, Robert. About a month ago, my parents came to see me. They didn't come to reconcile. They came to demand custody of Emma after I died. When I refused, they threatened to destroy my reputation and claim I was an unfit mother. They said they had connections in the legal system and enough money to make any story believable." Sarah leaned closer to the camera, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "They also said something that terrified me more than dying. They said Emma was contaminated by my influence and would need years of correction to become a proper young lady. Robert, they see our daughter as a problem to be fixed, not a miracle to be celebrated. Don't let them win." Rob sat in stunned silence as the video ended. The Mitchells weren't grieving grandparents. They were the same controlling, emotionally abusive people who had driven their own daughter away and were now trying to get their hands on Emma to start the cycle all over again. The next morning, Rob and Michael Chen burst into the courthouse with their new evidence. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a stern woman in her 60s who'd been presiding over family court for 20 years, listened with growing anger as they played Sarah's video and presented the documentation of the Mitchells' threats and attempted bribery. "Your Honor," Michael argued, "this case isn't about what's best for Emma. It's about two people who abused their own daughter, trying to gain control over their granddaughter, to repeat the same patterns." Margaret Mitchell's lawyer tried to object, claiming the video was the product of a dying woman's delusions, but Judge Hendricks cut him off. "I've reviewed the hospice records and spoken with Emma's doctors. Sarah Mitchell was completely lucid when she made this recording. More importantly, I've also received a report from Dr. Santos about her examination of Emma." Rob held his breath as the judge continued. Dr. Santos found Emma to be a remarkably well-adjusted, confident child who shows no signs of trauma or distress. In fact, her evaluation specifically notes Emma's emotional security and strong attachment to her father. The contrast between Emma's current state and the allegations made by the Mitchells speaks volumes. Judge Hendricks turned to Margaret and Donald Mitchell, who sat rigid in their seats. "Furthermore, this court does not look kindly on attempts to manipulate witnesses or by false testimony. The evidence suggests you've done both in your efforts to gain custody of this child." "Your Honor," Margaret Mitchell spoke up, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger, "we only want what's best for Emma. She needs structure and proper guidance." "What Emma needs," Judge Hendricks interrupted sharply, "is to remain with the father who loves her exactly as she is. the father her mother specifically chose for her. Rob felt tears streaming down his face as the judge continued. I'm awarding full legal custody of Emma Mitchell to her biological father, Robert Harrison, effective immediately. Furthermore, I'm ordering a restraining order against Margaret and Donald Mitchell. They are not to contact Emma or Mr. Harrison without court approval. As the gavel fell, Rob realized that Sarah's final gift hadn't just been the evidence that saved Emma. It had been the reminder that love meant accepting someone completely, not trying to change them into what you thought they should be. Emma was coming home. And this time, no one would ever be able to take her away from the father, who'd learned that the most important business he'd ever be in was the business of being her dad. But their story wasn't quite over yet, because Emma had been watching the proceedings from the courthouse hallway, and what she said when she ran into Rob's arms would be the final proof that some families are worth fighting for, no matter how difficult the battle becomes. "Daddy." Emma's voice echoed through the courthouse hallway as she broke free from the social worker's hand and ran toward Rob with her arms wide open. He caught her in the biggest hug of his life, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around as tears of joy streamed down both their faces. "I knew you'd win," Emma whispered into his ear as he held her tight. "I knew you wouldn't give up on me." "Never," Rob whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. "I will never, ever give up on you." As they walked out of the courthouse together, Emma's small hand firmly clasped in his. Rob caught sight of Margaret and Donald Mitchell standing by their car. Margaret was crying, but it wasn't the tears of a grandmother missing her grandchild. It was the frustrated weeping of someone who'd lost control of a situation they'd tried to manipulate. "Daddy," Emma said quietly, following his gaze, "do you think they really loved Mom?" Rob considered the question carefully, knowing that his answer would help shape how Emma understood family, love, and forgiveness. "I think they loved the idea of who they wanted your mom to be. But real love means accepting someone exactly as they are, not trying to change them into who you think they should be." Emma nodded solemnly, processing this wisdom with the remarkable maturity that never ceased to amaze him. "Like how you love me, even though I ask too many questions and I don't like Eggs Benedict?" Rob laughed, the sound echoing off the courthouse steps. "Especially because you ask questions and have opinions about breakfast. Those are some of my favorite things about you." The drive home felt different this time. Emma chatted excitedly about everything she'd missed during her week in foster care. How Mrs. Patterson next door had gotten a new cat, how the leaves on their maple tree were starting to turn orange, how she'd been worried he might forget to water the plants she'd helped him buy for the kitchen windowsill. "I didn't forget," Rob assured her. "I talk to them every morning, just like you taught me. I think they missed you too." When they pulled into their driveway, Emma gasped. Rob had spent the past week transforming their house from a showplace into a real home. The sterile perfection was gone, replaced by comfort and warmth. There were pictures of Emma on the mantel, her artwork hung proudly on the refrigerator, and a reading nook by the living room window complete with soft cushions and a basket full of books. "You changed everything," Emma breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "I didn't change everything," Rob corrected gently. "You changed everything. You taught me what a home should feel like." That evening they established a new tradition. Instead of Rob working late into the night while Emma did homework nearby, they made dinner together, talked about their days, and then curled up on the couch to read. Emma had chosen a book about a little girl who tamed a dragon not with force but with kindness and understanding. "The dragon wasn't really mean," Emma explained as she read aloud. "He was just lonely and scared, so he acted angry to protect himself." Rob thought about how accurately that described his own life before Emma arrived. Successful but isolated, powerful but afraid to let anyone close enough to matter. As Emma drifted off to sleep that night, she mumbled something that made Rob's heart swell with pride and love. "Daddy, I'm glad Mom was brave enough to tell me about you. And I'm glad you were brave enough to let me find you." Rob kissed her forehead and whispered back, "I'm glad too, sweetheart. Best decision I ever made was choosing to have lunch with a very special little girl." The months that followed brought changes that Rob never could have imagined. He restructured his entire company, promoting his most trusted executives and transitioning to a role that allowed him to work from home 3 days a week. He discovered that spending time with Emma didn't make him less effective at his job. It made him more focused, more creative, and infinitely happier. And Emma thrived in her new school, making friends easily and impressing her teachers with her curiosity and compassion. She joined the school's environmental club and convinced Rob to help her start a recycling program at Harrison Tech. She also persuaded him to adopt a rescue dog, a gentle golden retriever named Sunny, who seemed to understand that his most important job was being Emma's best friend. 6 months after the custody battle ended, Rob received an unexpected phone call. It was from a young journalist named David Chen, no relation to his lawyer, who was writing a story about single fathers in corporate America. "Mr. Harrison, I've heard you've made some dramatic changes to your work-life balance. Would you be willing to share your story?" Rob looked across the room where Emma was teaching Sunny to shake hands, her laughter filling their home with joy. "I'd be happy to share our story," Rob replied, "but it's not really about work-life balance. It's about learning what matters most." The article, when it was published, became one of the most read pieces the magazine had ever run. Rob's story inspired dozens of other executives to re-evaluate their priorities and spend more time with their families. But the real measure of success wasn't in magazine articles or business awards. It was in the small daily moments that made up their life together. Emma's first A+ on a math test, celebrated with ice cream for dinner. Rob's first successful attempt at braiding her hair, even though it took him 4 tries and a YouTube tutorial. Their weekend adventures exploring hiking trails around Seattle, Emma pointing out every interesting rock and unusual cloud formation. And every night, as Rob tucked Emma into bed, she would ask the same question. "Daddy, will you tell me a story about when you were little?" Rob would share memories of his own childhood, but more importantly, he would tell her about the man he was becoming because of her, someone who understood that success wasn't measured in quarterly profits or stock options, but in the trust of a child who believed you would always be there when she needed you. On the first anniversary of the day Emma had walked into his office building and asked if she could have lunch with him, Rob took her back to that same executive dining room on the 20th floor. The staff remembered her and brought out a special grilled cheese sandwich cut into the shape of a heart. "Daddy," Emma said as they looked out over the Seattle skyline, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been brave enough to find you?" Rob reached across the table and took her small hand in his. Every day, I'm grateful that you were brave enough for both of us." Emma smiled, that radiant expression that had become the center of Rob's world. "Mom always said that love makes people brave. I think she was right." As the sun set over the city below, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Rob realized that Emma was absolutely right. Love had made them both brave enough to fight for each other, to change their lives completely, and to build a family that was stronger than blood, deeper than obligation, and more powerful than any force that had tried to tear them apart. They were home, they were family, and they were exactly where they belonged.